This is the hotly anticipated 7th generation Honda Civic Type R, the very latest in a long line of iconic hot hatchbacks. Now this version promises even more performance and driver involvement than ever before, but it comes at a cost. At $72,600, this is the most expensive Honda hatchback ever sold in Australia, and it's a whopping $12,000 more than the version it replaces. So I want to find out, is it just too expensive? At nearly $73,000, the Honda Civic Type R is a lot of money. And with that kind of budget, it brings into line a couple of other German options with all-wheel drive. But the chassis of this car is so sharp and so involving, you very quickly forget just which wheels are driven. Is it too expensive? Well, there's an expression that if something genuinely is too much money, people simply won't buy it. And this car already has more than 1,000 orders to its name, and sales have blown out to 2 years. Is the Honda Civic Type R too much money? Well, it certainly seems Australia's hot hatch aficionados think it's a bit of a bargain. Certainly on the outside, the new Type R is looking way more premium. With a revision of overall aerodynamics, this car is slipperier, but it's actually also more stable at speed. One of the most obvious visual changes is here. Now, in the previous version, it was a bonnet scoop. We've now gone for a bonnet vent, and that's changed the way air flows through that revised grille, through the radiators in the intercooler. Much more stable, much lower drag. The wheels are also a significant change. Now they're 19 inches, which is an inch smaller than the previous version, but they somehow look bigger, and that's because Honda has employed a new design. They're calling it reverse rim. Now what that means is the chunky bit of the rim is at the back now, so you can't see it, and it creates this lovely slender profile on the outside. So it looks big, but it also looks really skeletal and fine and lightweight. And it is, it's much lighter. And they're wrapped in Michelin Pilot Sport 4S rubber, so plenty of grip in the dry. We'll have to see how that goes in the wet. And the braking setup has changed as well. 2-piece Brembo rotors with 4-piston calipers, so we should have premium brakes as well. Plenty more to talk about at the back end, starting with this huge spoiler. A couple of things I really like about this. First of all, it has an aerodynamic effect and it produces more downforce or reduces more lift than the previous design. And secondly, it's way less ostentatious than the previous version. And there's a third thing as well. It's been specially designed so that you can't see it in your rear view mirrors. It's sitting there doing its functional thing, not getting in your way. Also, big change for the exhaust. So still 3 pipes like the previous one, but now we've got the big one in the middle and the 2 skinny ones on the outside, rather than the other way around as it was previous version. Now the reason for that change is to make it a little bit more noisy. One of the most frequent customer inquiries and demands was they wanted more noise from the Type R. We'll have to see how that goes a little bit later. In the previous version, the styling of the Type R was controversial at best. I'm very happy to say that with the revised styling, this car is way less polarizing and in my mind, quite beautiful. Behind this manual boot lid though, there is a 410-litre boot, which is huge for a car of this class. Fold the seats down, it goes to more than 900 litres. So this vehicle is shaping up to be both a performance car and also a practical hatchback. Plenty more to look at in the interior though. Jump aboard this particular Civic and there is absolutely no mistaking you're in a Type R thanks to these amazing seats. They're upholstered in a new type of fabric that is even redder than the previous Type R. And speaking of red fabric, I have such a soft spot for red carpets and they are everywhere in this car as well. Rear passengers are not quite so well catered for. They don't get bucket seats and nor do they get that lovely red upholstery. And also another note to make with this version is it's now 4-seater, whereas the previous Type R was a 5-seater. I've also got Alcantara on the steering wheel. I've got that lovely teardrop shaped aluminium gear knob. That was for a little while discontinued in the previous generation, but it came back in the late life of the previous gen Type R. And there's tons of kit in here as well. One thing I particularly like about this car is it's one variant with no options. In fact, the only option in the whole car is a choice of 5 different paint colours. Otherwise, everything is standard. So I've got a lovely 10.2-inch touchscreen up here. I've got wireless device charging. I've also got wireless Apple CarPlay, but for Android Auto, you have to plug in. Now this car is obviously very well appointed on the inside, but the main concern in here is this little button down here which says plus R. And what this car is all about is how it drives. One of the most exciting cars I drove in the whole of 2021 was the standard entry-level Honda Civic LX. Now, I liked it because it's a pretty good all-round car, arguably a little bit expensive too, but one of the best things about it was it had an absolutely sensational chassis. We also really like the hybrid version of the Civic, so what we're thinking is if those two cars can be as rewarding to drive in the entry level, imagine what the Type R is going to be like. I'm happy to say that my expectations have absolutely been met. The 2023 Civic Type R has completely revised suspension. Not that it really needed it, because the previous version was an absolute hoot, but oh my god, the transformation is incrementally brilliant. Matched to that, an absolutely gorgeous steering system. As soon as you jump in this car, you can feel the weight in the steering wheel and you know you're going to be in for something good. But it's not just artificial weight dialed in for no reason, it's amazingly communicative. Front wheel drives can be a little bit horrid when you get stuck in with big power outputs and twisty corners like this, but the Civic is an absolute delight, and that is because up front is a new Helical LSD and it sorts everything out like witchcraft. Sometimes high-powered front wheel drives can torque steer all over the road, but then you tighten the diff up to sort that out, and then they just tramline like a nightmare. But somehow the Civic engineers have managed to get the balance right of a beautiful tight diff, virtually absent torque steer, and unbelievably obedient when you hack onto a line like this. And then there's the 2-litre turbo 4-cylinder petrol, 235 kilowatts, 7 kilowatts more than the previous generation. And to be honest, it didn't really need a lot more power or performance, but having that little bit extra has just brought that whole chassis combination alive. My only criticism perhaps is that I suspect there's a little bit of engine note being piped through the speakers artificially, and this engine just doesn't need it. It's got such a lovely raw mechanical sound to it, almost a little bit like the old Sierras and Escort Cosworths that just were pure valve noise and induction sound and exhaust. One thing that is noticeably absent is the old version was very taily, especially when you push it on cold tyres, whereas this one with its revised multi-link rear suspension seems way more tied down. Good for wet roads like this, winding through countryside with too many trees either side, but on a track maybe you want a little bit more playfulness. I'll hold judgment until we manage to put this one on the track, which I sincerely hope we're going to do soon. That revised power output and torque comes from a gentle revision of the exteriors. Now, the interior is the same. We've got a new induction system, new turbo, new exhaust system, and the engine management system has been reprogrammed. Other than that, it's the same good old 2-litre 4-cylinder that we loved in the last version. And bolted to that lovely 4-cylinder is a 6-speed manual. Now, you can't get an auto. I don't know, love or hate that idea. It's certainly a purist's option. And that's been revised as well. I particularly like this gearbox because first gear is very tall. You've also got synchro meshes on the first gear, and it does its rev matching down into first from second. So you can use every gear and they're really tightly bunched. But because you've got such a tall first gear, you can stay in virtually every one all day long. Thanks to that 7,000 RPM rev limit. Also new to the 2023 Type R is Honda's Log R application. Now I know you could get that on a smartphone with the previous generation, but now it's built in, it's native to the infotainment system. And it gives you access to all the lovely performance monitoring and driver ability, bragging rights, applications and features. You can download them all afterwards and look at them later, which I thoroughly recommend you do, because when you're on roads like this, you need your eyes there, not down there. And there is a staggering amount of grip. Now, I looked at the conditions this morning and I thought, well, we might get a couple of dry roads, and I hope we do, because on Michelin Pilot Sport 4S's, things can get a little bit slippery. But I have to say, the grip levels laterally in corners are absolutely staggering. Because it's front wheel drive and we're dealing with 235 kilowatts, you can spin up those front wheels first, second and third gears, even with traction control all fully on. But it's the cornering speed that is so eye-opening. And all the time you're getting all this lovely feedback through the steering wheel. You can tell when those front wheels are reaching their limits of adhesion under acceleration. The brakes are super confident thanks to those new 2-piston rotors. And there's just this constant sense of communication between the car and you. I absolutely love it. So you could argue that this car is very expensive, and you could argue also that with the $70,000 budget, you'd be looking at some German cars like the BMW 135i or perhaps the Audi S3. And then people will immediately say, well, of course, this car is out of its depth because it only has front wheel drive, whereas those two rivals, for example, have all-wheel drive. I totally disagree. On the Nürburgring or on a wet road like this, I would say absolutely the Germans would be quicker point to point, but this car is about being fast, but not really about lap times. It's about having fun. How many times have you heard people talk about the MX-5, a not particularly quick car, as one of the benchmarks for ultimate driving machines? It's exactly the same in this car. Put it up against an all-wheel drive something or other, and it's probably going to be a few tenths slower. But I tell you, out of this and any German ultra hatch, this is the one I'll be smiling most in at the end of the day.